16. Here in Matthew 16, there was a lot of rumors floating around about Jesus, and people were debating who he was and wondering who this was. And Jesus turns to his own disciples and asks them, okay, I know what everybody else is saying about me, but who do you say that I am? And here in Matthew 16, starting in verse 16, we have Peter's answer. In verse 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Because Peter was right in his answer, Jesus declares that it is upon the rock of Peter's confession that he is the Christ, that he will build his church. Jesus knows the only people in the future who will be able to join his church are those willing to have the faith of Peter and the understanding of Peter that Jesus really is the King and the Son of God. But this morning, in order to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, I really want us to focus on what he says about the church at the end of verse 18. That is, that the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Some translations say the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Hades is the realm of the dead. In the Old Testament, it's the word Sheol. And all people, whether righteous or wicked, go to Hades or Sheol when they die. That's why it's sometimes called the grave, because it refers to the place that all of the dead go. And Jesus' language is so interesting because he figuratively describes the realm of the dead like a walled city with gates. And he's drawing this language from the Old Testament, as Jesus so often does. For instance, when King Hezekiah became ill, God told him through the prophet Isaiah, "Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." And of course, Hezekiah was distraught about this. And Hezekiah, he had a journal. And he wrote this in his journal in Isaiah 38:10, "In the middle of my life, I am to enter the gates of Sheol. I am to be deprived of the rest of my years." Now, to help us appreciate Jesus' language about the gates of Hades, it's important to know that gates meant three things in the ancient world. And one could argue that gates mean the same three things today. First of all, gates are a sign of strength and success. Long before the people of Judah were taken captive to Babylon, they had a righteous king named Asa, and he tore down all of the idols in Judah, and he wanted to strengthen and restore Judah to a position of prosperity and flourishing. And one of the ways that he did that was to lead a construction project. And in 2 Chronicles 14:7, it says this, he said to Judah, "Let us build these cities and surround them with walls and towers, gates and bars." So they built and prospered. Now, unfortunately, later in their history, Babylon came in, destroyed the walls of Jerusalem, destroyed the gates of Jerusalem. And if you'll recall, after the people of Judah spent 70 years in Babylonian captivity, they returned under Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple, and then Ezra came and taught them the law, and you would think that would be awesome, right? That's a wonderful thing. They rebuilt the temple, they returned home, everything's going well, but somebody is upset. And that's Nehemiah, because he's trapped in Persia. And even though, yeah, okay, it's great, they rebuilt the temple and all that, there's a huge problem. He realized the walls are still destroyed, and, quote, the gates have been burned with fire. You see, Nehemiah was distressed because without gates, it's not a real city. Yeah, I mean, they had unwalled, ungated villages, but they weren't considered strong, flourishing cities because they had no real defenses against invaders. And that was mainly because they didn't have the money or the human resources to build a wall with gates for their town. If your town was successful, it meant, hey, you've got the manpower, you've got the skill, you've got the money to fortify it with gates, because gates signaled strength and success. Now, if you think about this metaphorically, because Jesus is being metaphorical with his gate imagery, Since the dawn of time, no city has had more strength and success than Hades, the realm of the dead. If the world started around 6000 BC with Adam and Eve, the estimates are that roughly 70 billion people have lived in this world and also died and entered the gates of Hades. And this city contains people from all walks of life: kings, prophets, priests, judges, elders, deacons, apostles, celebrities, the foolish, the good, the evil, the righteous. Death is a flourishing city in the sense that it has overcome every human being to ever live and invited and welcomed them in to its gates. As Ecclesiastes 3:20 says, all go to the same place. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Secondly, gates are meant to keep people in. Gates are a way for city leaders to keep people from escaping who they don't want to leave. Now, you may be thinking, well, Brian, a city where you're not allowed to leave doesn't sound like much of a city at all. It sounds more like a prison. That's exactly right. Hades has gates because it is a prison from which no one can escape. Everyone goes in, but no one comes out. Job puts it this way in Job 7, verses 9 and 10. When a cloud vanishes, it is gone. So he who goes down to Sheol does not come up. He will not return again to his house, nor will his place know him anymore. Psalm 89, verse 48 says, what man can live and not see death? Can he deliver his soul from the power of Sheol? See, the psalmist recognizes here that not only do all of us die, but none of us can escape from death's power. It's like spiritual Alcatraz. And once those gates shut behind us, we are locked in forever. And then finally, gates are meant to keep attackers out. Now, this may seem odd to think of death wanting to keep people out, because death seems very welcoming, right? It welcomes everyone into its gates. And yet, figuratively speaking, the realm of the dead, Jesus pictures as having gates for defense, just in case someone tries to come and attack it and conquer its city. And again, since the dawn of time, no one out of 70 billion people has been able to successfully attack the gates of Hades and win. So many people have tried to defeat death and failed because its gates are impenetrable. The good news is, God has an amazing track record of destroying strong, successful cities with seemingly impenetrable gates. For instance, when the Israelites marched against Sihon and Og on their way to the Promised Land, it says in Deuteronomy 3:5, all these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars. When Israel marched around the city of Jericho, God brought their walls by His power and their gates tumbling down. Psalm 107, verse 106, praises God because He, quote, shatters gates of bronze and cuts iron bars asunder. But someone might say, okay, Brian, fair enough, but those are all physical, earthly cities with physical gates. The city of death, Hades, the realm of the dead, has gates that are far more impenetrable and cannot be sieged and knocked down with battering rams like human earthly cities. No, the defeat of Hades, it called for a much more brilliant strategy. A strategy like the Greeks' Trojan horse. The legend goes that the city of Troy was besieged by the Greeks for 10 years without success because its gates were absolutely impenetrable. So the Greeks built this giant wooden horse, and they gave it to the Trojans, and they presented it to them as a gift from the goddess Athena and as a sign of their surrender. And the Trojans bought the story, and they opened the gates. They brought this horse in, and they did not realize the Greeks had hidden a group of elite soldiers inside that wooden horse. And that night, while everyone was asleep, the soldiers snuck out of the horse, killed all of the guards, and then they opened the gates from the inside, allowing the rest of the Greek army to pour into the gates and conquer the city. You see, instead of the Greeks forcing their way through the gates, which had only failed in the past, they tricked the Trojans into inviting them in. The city that was impossible to be conquered from the outside could only be conquered from within. Now let's bring this to Jesus. Look in 1 Corinthians 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Because here Paul says that the evil world rulers, they did not understand God's wisdom and what he was planning in Christ. And he makes a fascinating statement in 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 8. He says, "This is a wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory." You see, the evil rulers of this age, and I believe this passage includes Satan himself, thought that by putting Jesus to death on the cross, they won. In fact, they would have viewed Jesus' death as a sign of surrender. And even Hades, the city of death itself, would have rejoiced, because this time it didn't just trap another, regular human being inside of its gates, but this time the Son of God. This was the ultimate victory for death. Or so death thought. Because once death invited Jesus into its gates, it did not anticipate that 3 days later, Jesus would break out and defeat all of the guards and then unlock the gates of Hades from the inside by raising victoriously from the dead. He did what none of the other 70 billion people in the world could do. He broke free from Alcatraz, right? He found a way to escape the gates of Hades so that those gates would not prevail against him. Peter puts it this way in Acts 2 and verse 24. God raised Jesus up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. See, Jesus wasn't just victorious over the gates of Hades, but over Satan, the gatekeeper of that city too. Satan is the one who kept us trapped in the city of death. He kept the gates of Hades locked by the power of sin. It was our sin that Satan used against us to send us to Hades in the first place, and then to keep us there forever once we got there. And yet, Hebrews 2, verses 14 and 15 says, "Through death, Jesus rendered powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and that he might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives." You see, when Jesus died on a cross, it was not an act of surrender to death or to Satan. It was an invasion of Hades. It was an invasion of death. And by taking care of the problem of sin, Satan was stripped of his power to keep us in the prison of that death. And here's the most amazing part, and we'll finish with this verse. If you turn to Revelation chapter 1, John has a vision in Revelation 1, and he sees Jesus. And it's this incredible picture of Jesus in his glory. And listen to what Jesus says in Revelation 1, verses 17 and 18. John says, "When I saw him," verse 17, "I fell at his feet like a dead man. And he placed his right hand on me, saying, 'Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, and the living one, and I was dead. But behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and of Hades.'" Wow. It's so brilliant that instead of Jesus smashing down the gates of Hades with a battering ram from the outside, which has always been impossible, he allowed himself to die so that he would be welcomed into those gates by death and by Satan himself. But then he stripped Satan of the keys, and he used those keys to unlock the gates from within at his resurrection. And now the great news is, if we put our faith in him and we follow Jesus, he'll use his keys to unlock the gates of Hades for us too. so that death is only temporary now and cannot hold us forever. So as we partake of the Lord's Supper, let's remember the fact that Christ's death was an infiltration of a formerly impenetrable city that has now been conquered forever. And because the gates of Hades could not prevail against Jesus, that means if we're in Christ, they cannot prevail against us, His church, either. Even if we die, even if we are killed for our faith, just as Jesus rose bodily from the grave and broke free from death's power, so too will we one day. Which means because of His death and resurrection, we don't have to live in fear of death ever again. Because our King has the keys now.